Hi, and welcome to Podcasting 101 with Rachel. This podcast is for busy female entrepreneurs who run their own businesses and want to start a podcast, or who may already have a podcast. I want to share practical information and tips on how you can get your podcast started and managing it along the way. I'll also be interviewing other female podcast hosts to give you real insight into what it's like having your own podcast. Hi, and welcome to this week's episode. Today, I'm very excited to have the lovely Sarah McDowell, my partner in crime when it comes to podcast communities, coming onto the show and talking all things SEO for your podcast. So hi, Sarah. Thanks so much for coming on and talking to me.
Thank you very much for asking me. It's a privilege to be on your podcast and love the fact that you see me as your partner in crime when it comes to podcasting communities, because I see you that way too.
Yes. And we're both very excited for our in-person event that's coming on the 29th of September. And I actually can't remember off the top of my head when this episode is going out. So it may have already happened. Very professionally sorted out there. But anyway, so Sarah is an SEO manager for Captivate, which is a podcast hosting platform, if you didn't already know already. And she is also the host of the SEO Mindset podcast. So Sarah lives, breathes, and eats podcasts.
Yes.
And so do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and your podcast as well?
Yes, definitely. So I've been working in digital marketing and specializing in search engine optimization, SEO, for over 10 years now. And I think last time I looked, it was around the 12, 13 year mark. So that's pretty cool. So, and I've done a mixture of working in-house for a brand or a company, so like I'm doing now for Captivate. But I've also done agency side as well. And I really enjoy working at Captivate because, like you say, they are a podcast hosting platform. And I'm also a podcaster. So I'm kind of combining my two passions and my two loves of SEO and podcasting. And how many podcasts? So I've had 4 podcasts. So my most recent one is the SEO Mindset podcast, which I host with my wonderful friend, Tasmin Silman. And that podcast is all about, so what me and Tasmin found was there's lots of wonderful podcasts out there that tell SEO professionals or people who want to know about SEO how to do it. But we found a niche in a podcast that was specifically about giving career and like personal development, that kind of like mindset, that kind of thing, specifically for the SEO industry. So we talk about imposter syndrome, anxiety, getting a pay rise, time management, work-life balance. So it's been running for about a year now. So I imagine there'll be links in the episode.
Absolutely.
Show notes.
There will be.
Wonderful. So you don't necessarily have to be an SEO to listen to the podcast, because I have a few friends that get something from it because we're talking about topics that are quite transferable across different industries. It's just
I totally agree with that. I've listened to it as well, and definitely something that resonates with me as well. Like, for example, the latest one's talking about the win jar. Which I started and I've done 1 win, which is really rubbish. But
you've still got a win jar.
I have. Well, it's a win piece of paper on my desk at the moment because I couldn't find a jar. But it is totally intentionally be a win jar because I really, really like that idea, because sometimes it is really easy to forget that, when you get bogged down a little bit of all the extra little wins that you get. So I really love that. I really like that you shared it. So I would highly recommend people to go listen to your podcast as well.
Thank you. Yeah, so that episode, celebrating your wins, because like you say, you forget, and you get a win, or you reach a goal, or you do an accomplishment, and then you then you're on to the next thing, aren't you? Like,
Yeah.
okay, what's my next win? But yeah, we need to celebrate our wins. So that was our latest one. So yeah, there's lots of wonderful episodes. We just give examples in like the SEO industry. But like I say, we're talking about sort of topics that affect us all in our work and even personal life. So please do check it out.
Absolutely. So we thought SEO or search engine optimization is something that we all do think about generally for our businesses and for our marketing, but especially here in relation to our podcast. So Sarah's going to just explain a little bit about what SEO is and how that can translate to your podcast.
Yes. So first things first, what is search engine optimization? What is SEO? So what we mean by that term is basically where you do tactics or strategies to your website to optimize it so that people can find your website and your pages, your content when people search for relevant terms in search engines like Google. So it's the idea of, so Google has an algorithm, and an algorithm is basically a fancy word for a bit of a checklist. Okay. So when Google is looking at websites and pages and deciding, okay, what pages do I rank for this term? It has sort of like a checklist, its algorithm that it's kind of looking at. So yeah, as SEOs, or if you're doing SEO to your website, it's the idea of you optimizing for Google. So you're kind of saying, hey, Google, my website, my pages are awesome and relevant, and you should show me for relevant terms that people are searching for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a really good way to explain it, because I do think that sometimes people can hear SEO or search engine optimization and think, oh, what's that? And, oh, that sounds really complicated. And I mean, I must say, when I first kind of came across it, I did a marketing qual a few years ago, and like there's a whole book on it separately, and some bits, you know, I felt like, oh, this is too much. I need to kind of bring it back to basics. And you have explained it very well. I was talking to my dad the other day, and he was like, what's SEO? What's this? I don't understand it at all. I mean, he is 70, but that way I'm sure he'd understand it listening to your explanation there. So you did a much better job than me.
What is funny is lots of people who aren't in this industry or understand just know me as working with computers. Like, yeah. I'm IT support, and I'm like, not quite. Or, can you fix my printer? Not really.
Not the same.
So that's SEO. So that's search engine optimization. So when we are talking specifically about podcast SEO, so obviously you've got to think that people can come across your podcast and episodes in lots of different ways. So here we're talking about discoverability. So the discoverability of your podcast. Now, the most traditional way that people can come across your podcast and episodes is by going to an app. So going to Spotify, going to the app on their phone, like Castbox, I think is what my Android uses, goes to Amazon Music, go to Apple Podcasts, whatever.
Google Podcast is mine Google for Podcasts. Android. Yeah.
We could just sit and list all the different directories, but we'll be here forever. So whatever someone uses to listen to podcasts, they fire it up, and in the search bar, they put in certain terms. They might search for a specific person, or they might search for a specific podcast. But that's one way that someone can come across your podcast. Another way, and there's lots of other ways, like I'm just giving like two examples here. Like, so the most traditional one.
Yeah.
But people can come across your podcast and episodes when they are searching the web. Now, I did a little bit of keyword research. So basically keyword, that's another fancy term for what people use to the terms or queries people use in Google when they're searching for different things. So I've got a keyword research tool where I can put in topics, and it will give me suggestions of keywords, and it will give me lots of different data. But one of the most important things that I'm looking at is, on average, how often is this keyword searched for? So what's the monthly search volume? And this is what like keyword research tools do. There's loads out there, but in this example, I'm using SEMrush or SEMrush. Now for the keyword best podcast, so just best podcast, SEMrush is saying that on a monthly basis, on average, so this is on average as well, there's over 30,000 searches on Google globally a month. Okay.
Wow.
So just get that number into your head. And that is just the keyword best podcast. So obviously that could be best music podcast, best podcast about podcasting, best podcast about SEO sort of thing, right? So I just wanted to share that to show you the untapped sort of, well, not untapped. It's untapped if you're not doing SEO or you're not looking into this. But I just wanted to share with you that kind of number to show you that people are searching and people are going to Google to find podcasts. So we can do SEO strategies to our podcast website and our podcast episodes to help us optimize for Google. And also what you've got to think as well is, yes, someone might go to Google to specifically search for like podcast recommendations, but also they might search for something else that's unrelated to podcasts. But say, for example, they search for, I don't know, give me a topic, anything, Rachel. I know I've put you on the spot here.
Animals.
I mean, that's very broad and very general.
Okay.
Okay, I've got one. Tips on how to train your dog. Right.
Yeah.
Train your dog, for example. Did put you on the spot there. I do apologise.
Stop, panic.
So someone searched for that, right? You could be a podcast that is all about training animals, training pets, and all of that stuff. And you could have a podcast episode that is about that topic, right? So you can see where I'm going here. So someone has searched for help about how to train their dog, for example. And yes, there'll be articles and there'll be pages about that. But if you have a podcast episode and you've got a dedicated page for that episode, you've got a chance of Google showing that podcast episode to someone who's searching in Google, and someone who wasn't even like planning on listening to a podcast and Google shows your podcast about that keyword, might come onto you and be like, oh, well, I wasn't expecting this, but actually I like to consume podcasts. I like to consume content and educational resources through my ear holes. That's a weird way of saying it, but like, I like to listen to educate myself. So that's great, right? So someone who wasn't even like looking specifically for podcasts or wasn't even like thinking about podcasts, because you've optimized your podcast episode and that page, Google have shown you and you've got a new listener. So does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a really good way to explain it. Yeah, I'd never thought about it in that way. I guess because I'm always thinking about it in terms of my podcast, which is about podcasting. But I think that's a really good way to look at it and to understand how to get your episodes will be hopefully be seen by people if you're
so
optimizing.
you're just thinking of ways that you can increase the discoverability of your podcast, right? And there's lots of ways, like social media is another one. Yeah, that's another way that people can come across your podcast. YouTube. So you've just got to think of SEO, podcast SEO, as another way that you are, it's just another way
going to be found by
that you're going to be found. Exactly.
Yeah. And obviously we want to be as discoverable as possible.
Exactly.
So we can see how these ways in where you become more discoverable by optimizing your SEO. So I'd love it if you could share your top 3 tips on things to do to get become more discoverable.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so tip number 1, and I've already spoke about keywords. So yes, Rachel, what are keywords?
They are the search terms that the thing that people use to search and
in Google
to find in Google for your thing. You mentioned the tool SEM Rush. Is that what you called it? Because I've used something like Answer the Public as well.
Yes, so there's lots of different tools out there. So obviously, my first tip is keywords, and you will need to use some sort of keyword research tool. Okay, now there's lots out there. And they range from being free to and paid for. Basically, the ones that you pay for, the more expensive ones, you just get more features or more added bits that you can do. But for just starting out, or for what we need it for in this example, you'll be fine with a free tool or a cheaper paid for tool. Okay.
I was going to ask that, whether or not it's worth investing in something.
I use SEM Rush because I use that at work in a professional professional way. But there's loads of tools out there that you can use for free. Answer the Public is a great one. There's also Asked. Okay. So the difference between Also Asked and Answer the Public gets its data from, so when you're typing in Google and Google auto suggests, that's where the data comes from with Answer the Public.
Yes, because they're very...
So they're what we call long tail. So you have keywords that are short, which are normally like 3 to 5 characters. No, 3 to 5 words, sorry. Or you have your more long tail keywords. So your long tail keywords are like your longer phrases, or where someone's gone to ask a question, for example, in Google.
I do, because I've also used Answer the Public to help me with some topics sometimes, or frequently asked questions. And
Answer the Public gets its data from, when you're like searching the web and it comes up with a little box that say people also ask.
Yes.
That's where Also Ask gets their data from.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're both really valuable, and both Also Asked, and it's been a while since I've used Answer the Public, but I think they both offer sort of free options.
You can have, I think it's like 1 or it might be up to 3. So I haven't used the other one, but Answer the Public, I think it's like either 1 or 3 searches a day for free. So, if you wanted to do, and then you can export it as an CSV, like a spreadsheet. Yeah. So, if you've got a couple of different topics or ways you want to ask, you can get a couple of, that should be enough for one day to go through that kind of data and figure some of those things out.
100%. They're really, they're really great tools. But there's other ones out there as well. So SEM Rush, Ahrefs. There's also like Chrome extensions that you can have. Just go to Google and type
Google keywords.
Google keyword. There we go.
Google keywords.
So go to Google and search best free keyword research tools or best keyword research tools, and there'll be loads of people that have like reviewed them for you, so you can like sort of see what you get and stuff. But you don't need anything too fancy. Right? You just need the basics for this, for what we need it for. So we talked about keyword research tools. So when you are planning your episodes, like use a keyword research tool. So using your Also Ask or your Answer the Public to help you plan your episodes, right? Because you know that these are the terms that are being used and surfaced in Google. So you need to be using that keyword, whether it's a shorter phrase or a long tail keyword. You need to make sure that you're using that in your episode title. Yeah. You also want to be using it in your episode show notes as well. So whatever keyword research tool you decide to use, just have it. So the next time that you're planning your episodes, or you're planning your season, or you're planning your next 3, 4, 5 episodes, put in your topic, and not only will you know what people are searching for around that topic, but it also might come up with other suggestions that you might have not even been aware of, or that you've not even thought about. So you could go into more detail, or you could split it up as like part 1, part 2. So it's a really great way of planning your episodes and making sure that you're talking about stuff that people want to learn about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to make sure that it's relevant. I think that's the biggest key thing that you can do when you're creating your content, is to making sure that it's relevant. And if you're looking at those keywords, those are the most relevant thing that people are asking for your particular
100%.
subject.
100%. Now the difference between like your SEMrush and your Ahrefs is those tools will give you on average like the monthly search volume, whereas with Also Ask and Answer the Public, it doesn't, because it's different data. Okay, so just they're still
it just gives
valid.
you the terms, doesn't it?
Yeah, you can still use both of them. And just a word of warning about keyword stuffing. Okay, so like Google don't like this, podcast directories and apps don't like this, and your listeners, your audience won't like this. So this is where, like, you might have seen it, but where
websites back in the days used to just stuff as many keywords as they can on the website page. Oh my gosh, in one of my old jobs, I used to work in events, and there's the amount of pages I used to come across just looking at event companies and people that hide out event equipment. Literally, the pages would just be stuffed full of all the words. Ridiculous.
Right. So that is not helpful for anyone, is it?
No.
It's not helpful for users. It's not helpful for Google. So that's why Google's cracking down on stuff like that, because SEO's been around now for a while, so it's got a bit more sophisticated. So back in the day, you could do those kind of tactics to kind of play the system kind of thing. So when you're looking at episode titles, don't just list a load of keywords or synonyms. So synonyms, always hate saying that word because it's so hard to say, but synonyms are like related keywords that like mean the same thing but are said in different ways, right?
Right.
So don't just like stuff your show notes full of them, stuff your episode title full of them, because it's just not going to work. Like, do you know what I mean? Google cracks down on it. Apple, they've cracked down on that because people are trying it. It's not going to be helpful to your listeners, so just don't do it. Just don't do it.
You've been warned.
Yes, yes. So that's keywords, okay? Okay, another way that we can do podcast SEO is something called backlinks. Yeah? So backlinks is where you have someone that links to your website that's external from you. So for example, a backlink would be, so I have a podcast, Rachel has a podcast. If Rachel decides to link to one of my episodes on her podcast website, that is what we call a backlink. Okay. So it's an external to your domain. Backlinks are important, because what you've got to see backlinks is a vote to Google. So earlier on, I talked about Google's algorithm and Google's checklist. One of the things that it looks at is backlinks. So are people linking to this podcast website or this podcast episode? Because it's kind of like it helps Google trust that podcast episode or
because
that page.
Other people are endorsing it effectively.
Yes,
they're endorsing
kind of like giving it a thumbs up. Like, this
I
is
endorse
good.
this message.
I instantly just thought of LinkedIn when people were endorsing you all the time. I endorse you.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they're important, okay, and so get yourself some backlinks, and you've got to be proactive. So me and Rachel were actually talking about this, weren't we?
We were, weren't we? Because we'd had in our podcast group as well, our West Midlands Podcast Club, we had a lady, Sylvia, came in and talked about backlinks and the importance of them. And we were all the people in the group, we were going to write a blog and include backlinks in them. And I had written a blog for my website, but I was linking to another page in my website. So that wasn't quite the same as doing a backlink. That was an internal link.
Yes, still important, but you can just invite me back and I can talk about more stuff.
Definitely more episodes.
More SEO goodness.
Yes.
But yeah. So they're very important, and we've got to be proactive in getting them. Okay. So for example, something that I did earlier this year now, I think. But I decided to do some research on articles or pages that review the best SEO podcast, because I have an SEO podcast, right? So all I did was you could use a keyword research tool, but you could just open up Google as well. And I typed in best SEO podcast. Now, what Google showed me was a load of articles where people were reviewing the best SEO podcast out there, right? So I needed to be on there because that's one, a backlink for Google, but also these articles are being read. So when people are searching, what I said earlier, for like some inspiration, that's improving my discoverability. Yeah. So linking back to my earlier point, I'm a professional. I know what I'm doing here. So what I did was I looked at who was ranking on page 1 and 2. And if it was like a listicle, so like articles where they say 10 of the best SEO podcasts, and I wasn't being mentioned, so I found out who the author of that blog article was, tried to find how to contact them, whether that was on social media, email, whatever. And then I reached out to them and I said, great article, just want to let you know about my podcast. This is why it's different. This is why we think it's really good and really valuable to your audience. How about you include us? So I reached out to a load and it was successful. Someone reached back to me and they were like, do you know what, Sarah? This was at the end of 2022. And they were like, we're actually because it was the start of 2023. And they were like, we're actually reviewing this article
awesome.
And we need to update it. So you've timed it great. So, so start thinking for 2024, right? So
that's
start
really
reaching
good.
out.
Yeah.
But there's those other ways that you can like reach out and ask for backlinks.
Just a quick question about that. I mean, I love that idea. It's something that I wouldn't have thought of. That's why you're the expert, Sarah. But my question would be is like, if your podcast hasn't got a lot of listen, would it matter? Did you put things on about your listens or downloads or anything like that?
Not at all. Like our podcast, the SEO Mindset, we don't have crazy numbers. Not like what we did was, because our podcast is so different to what is out there, that was the angle that I went with. And I think I also shared a review that someone gave about my podcast, or where they reached out and stuff.
When you pitched, when you wrote to the person,
when you pitched. Okay. So and what you got to think is you're helping them with their work, because normally they'd have to go out and do the research, search podcasts and all of that. So if you're pitching them and you're giving them the reasons like, this is the title, this is the host, this is why we started, this is our favorite episode, this is what people are saying about it, make it hard for them to turn you down.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, but it doesn't always have to be. I didn't mention once my download numbers because like it didn't matter.
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it. And I do, we've talked about podcast numbers and things before, and that doesn't have to be your only measure of success, or like as well for your podcast, because like I love that you're and early this year you got a really cool sponsor as well, haven't you? And that, which I think is really awesome for your podcast. But I think that, you know, showing your community is out there, your people are there, they're getting something from your podcast. I think that's probably, in my personal opinion, that's probably the best thing that you can show for your podcast is that the impact that you're having on your community.
100%, because they want to showcase the podcasts that are actually making a difference at the end of the day. So,
yeah, and that's not necessarily to do with numbers, as we all know. It's better to have a small engaged audience than have a large.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a small engaged audience that actually do stuff when the hosts say things, right? Do you know what I mean? And I'm a big believer in a successful podcast isn't just about the number of downloads because it's not. Success comes in lots of different ways. So that's backlinks. So there's one example of how you can do it. Another example is you could have a look at the topics your podcast episodes have covered. Again, fire up old Google, do some searching in there, see what articles and content are coming up. And then if they're relevant to your podcast episode, find the author, find a way to contact them and be like, hey, great article, really build the person up, like say how awesome and what you learned from it. But what you could say is, we did a whole podcast episode that might be an additional great resource. So that's another way that you could get some backlinks. So there's lots of different ways. And when you start sort of thinking of ways that you can get people to link to your podcast and your episode, then you'll start thinking, oh, there's another idea. Another idea.
Yeah, these are awesome, Sarah. Thank you.
And then my last tip is podcast transcriptions. Okay, so transcriptions, they are the text version of your audio file. So we should be doing podcast transcriptions from an accessibility point of view anyway, because obviously not everyone can listen and hear podcasts, right? So we need to be given the text, so what do you call it, like the script or the transcript, of that audio to make it accessible to everyone so that everyone can consume your content. So we should be doing that anyway, but it also helps Google, right? So obviously you got to think that so there's a debate whether Google are automatically transcribing audio, right? But even if they are a tool, they're a robot or AI or whatever, they're going to get stuff wrong, right? So they might not 100% correctly automatically transcribe it. So having the text version, Google can understand words and text on a page. Do you know what I mean? Like that's what that's what it does well, and it's been doing for years. So making sure that you have a transcript helps with the discoverability. And also when Google's deciding what to rank for certain terms, it has to understand what your podcast and what your episode is about. So as you can imagine, if you've just got individual podcast pages with just your web player, for example, that's quite thin content and there's not much for Google to go on. So this is where your show notes come in handy, other content on the page, your transcript. Make sure that you tidy up your transcript as well, because obviously
I was going to ask about that.
It needs to be error free, again for accessibility reasons, but also from a Google point of view. So remove the filler words, because you want to make it as easy as possible for Google to understand what that podcast episode is about. So then when someone is searching, going back to my earlier example of dog training tips, right? Like when someone searches that and you've given Google as much information in a text format to make them really easily understand what your podcast is about, you've got a higher chance of being surfaced, right? And stuff. So but just make sure, because transcription tools are amazing, but they always get stuff wrong. They get names wrong, they get places wrong, they get whole chunks wrong. Like I've used a tool and they've said something very different, and I'm like, it doesn't even sound like that tool. Are you drunk? What's going on? So
I must say, this is probably a bad confession for a podcaster. I don't often go over my transcripts I use Descript and I take out the filler words. But I didn't think about. Also, a question, sidetracking slightly. How do the Google robots find your transcript? So I'll use my podcast for an example. So I use Captivate, and I upload my transcript into Captivate when I publish my episode. But when and then I also, so I have my Captivate, so you can access my podcast through my Captivate website page. But then I also embed the episode in a website page, and then I put the show notes as an actual blog post on my website. But would it find the transcripts, or would I need to put the transcripts available on my website as well? Or will they find it through the fact that it's through Captivate?
So for that, like if you're specifically wanting so in your example, you have separate episode pages on your podcast website, and those are the ones that you want to surface for certain terms, right?
Yeah. So on my main website, I have a blog thing, and then I have a separate page. So and embed each episode into that separate page and put the show notes in physically.
Okay. So as long as so it sounds like you've got quite detailed show notes. Which is going to help Google, because that's what I was saying, because you're adding text, you're giving content, you're helping Google understand. I would also, if you want Google to surface the transcripts as part of that page, it has to be accessible and visible on that page as well.
Right. Okay.
But if you have because it sounds like you sort of convert your episodes into a blog anyway.
Yeah, so it's as a blog, it's classed as a blog page on my website, and then I have the title, and then I embed the Captivate code, so it pulls in, so it's got a little player that's from Captivate, and then I put a physical, not physical, but I write a blog post, which is the show notes.
Yes. Well, I'd still, because your transcript's still going to go into a lot more detail, isn't it? So I would, to be on the safe side, because when we're optimizing, when we're optimizing for SEO, it's all about making it easy for Google to understand, index, find the content. So yeah, I would make sure that the transcript was visible on the page.
So not just put it as a link to the transcript, put the physical.
Yeah. Obviously, a link to the transcript's going to help, but then that link's going to take them somewhere else, and it won't be associated with that page.
Right.
So to be on the safe side, because how I do it, because I use Captivate websites. So basically a click of a button, and I upload transcripts, and because I'm using Captivate websites on my individual episode pages,
it has it there, doesn't it?
It publishes the transcript, so then Google can easily access that on the page.
But you're directing people to that one, aren't you? I mean, I do love my Captivate website. I have it designed really nicely, but because I also have a business as well, I want people to you've got look and see my business case as well. So I kind of send people to my website and do it that way,
which is perfectly reasonable. That's
But because I've got the transcripts displayed on my Captivate one, does that? But I would have to promote that link, though, wouldn't I? I'd have to promote that page specifically to get that to come up. It
all depends on what page you are optimizing to be shown in
the Google,
in search engine result pages when people are searching. If it is where the transcript already is, then great. But if you want, it probably makes sense in your use case for your business, because that's where so that's a great tip. I will definitely look into putting that on there, so just have that transcript at the bottom of the page and
after the show notes.
And with everything in marketing, you should be measuring it, right? So you could do some I mean, me too.
Of course I am.
But you can always do a few, let them run for a few months, and then see if there's been a positive impact and stuff.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But yeah, like, because like everything, because I completely understand that we don't have a lot of time and resource on our hands. Me with the SEO Mindset podcast, it's a side hustle.
Yeah.
Like, it's not my 9 to 5. One day, no, I'm joking. But yeah, like, we've got to be, yeah, like, we don't have lots of time.
Yeah, just trying to get everything done. It is hard to fit it all in, but you definitely made me think more about my transcripts, and also I have been thinking about accessibility a lot. One of my friends, Hannah McCormick, she has a Showing Up Solo podcast, but she did an episode about accessibility, and then she had a lady called Anne Mock come on, who's a blind social influencer, and it was just really interesting listening to her talking about the alt text and things like that I'd not really considered. But since listening to that podcast episode, which I'll link in the show notes, it's really made me think a lot more about accessibility and putting in the alt text and thinking about those things, and not just to make it like surface for people who can.
I mean, with all these things, like, it's always for accessibility, and that's the core reason why we should be doing it. It's just handy because it also helps Google.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's also where so linking such a professional, I've already said this, but linking back to, like, you know how I said use a keyword research tool when you're planning your episodes. Because you've done your research and you know the keywords and terms, when you're recording your podcast episode, you're going to be naturally saying them. Remember, no keyword stuffing. Like, it still needs to be natural, like the quality of your audio, and but what I'm saying is, like, when you say the specific topic or something, you'll be using a keyword. So then when you transcribe it and you've got the text version, you'll have lovely keywords in there that you'll then add to your podcast episode page, which will help with you optimizing for different search terms. Smart.
Absolutely. Yes. You have given so much advice, Sarah, and I could actually talk to you so much longer about all of this stuff. You are so knowledgeable, and I would love to have you come back on the podcast another time for us to talk about all these awesome. And this is the kind of conversations why we wanted to start our podcast community as well, wasn't it? So we can have these types of conversations and learn new things from each other. And so I really appreciate you coming on and taking time out of your evening to come and chat with me. So what I will do is I will link to Sarah's podcast in the show notes, and I would really recommend you go and have a listen. Is there anything else you'd just like to leave us with?
Anything? This is where I need to say something really profound, don't I? And I've just got like nothing going on in my...
for me.
So yeah, don't get scared by podcast SEO. Right, I know that it can be scary, and it can seem like if you're not familiar and you've not been working with it for a while, it can seem a bit like, oh my gosh, a bit overwhelming. But just try stuff, right? Like, take a couple of my tips that I've done today, couple of my tips that I've said today, and just try it. Have a go. And what have you got to lose at the end of the day? Because it's all about increasing your discoverability, and podcast SEO. The tips that I've shared is all geared around helping you do that. So yeah, like, definitely come and join the West Midlands Podcasting Club, because this is where we have more conversations like this. I'm also on Twitter. I'm guessing you'll link to my social
I was
as well.
Say, link to Twitter and and the podcast and everything. So we can carry on, and the West Midlands Podcast Club as well. If you'd like to join, we'll pop a link there. So we have virtual meetups every second Thursday, and then we've got, like I said before, whether it's happened or not by the time this podcast episode comes out, but we are looking to do in-person events. So if you are local to us, which is in Worcestershire area, Birmingham, the West Midlands area, then we'd love for you to come and join and meet face to face and nerd more out about podcasts.
Yes, and I don't just talk about SEO, just as That's not all.
We talk all things.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Sarah. And thanks everybody for listening. And we'll speak to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like to connect with me or get in touch, then head on over to my website. If you liked the episode, then I'd love it if you could leave me a review in your chosen podcast app. Your feedback is much appreciated. See you next time.